Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. Or if it's your first time, welcome to my channel. My name is Marlene and I talk about eating disorder recovery and everything related to healing the relationship with your own body, with food, and with movement. And let's dive right into the topic as we always do. And today we're going to talk about the different eating disorders and why some people have an easier time to admit that they have a certain eating disorder than to admit that they have another eating disorder. And just to start this video out with my personal experience, when I was inpatient in 2015, I remember sitting on the table, the first week when you arrived, you would always have to eat on a table with a dietitian. So you were very closely observed so that they make sure that you eat everything and that they also observed your behaviors. And I remembered some very inappropriate table conversations that the dietitians would not always catch immediately. And one of those conversations was one person who was also inpatient for, I think, bulimia, binge purge type. And she was saying something like, "Oh, all you anorexics probably think you're so much better than us." And it was my first night and I remember thinking, I literally never thought of that. I honestly was so scared, I was so anxious, I was so afraid, but also so relieved that I could finally eat, which is a story for another time, that I was so focused on myself. I remember, yes, before I was admitted to the clinic, I was like, what if I'm not skinny enough? What if there's other people that, are skinnier than me and they think I'm too big to be here? And interestingly enough, unfortunately, a lot of people feel that way, but because so many people feel that way, it shows you that everyone is so focused on themselves. Everyone is so scared about being quote unquote too big, which already is, an error in thinking itself, because an eating disorder is not only classified by how much you weigh, and especially people with eating disorders are mostly very aware. Even though I had a restrictive eating disorder, I would have never judged somebody else by their body or to be like, oh, they probably don't have a restrictive eating disorder or they are not allowed to be here. So that was number one. Number two was I never actually thought about any eating disorder as better or worse. But when somebody brought that up, I actually started to really think about that. And I wondered, why is this person feeling that way? And I actually became friends with her later on. And she told me that she always felt like she doesn't have the discipline to not eat, because she always had those moments where she would eat and then, purge everything out. So a lot of people still connect not eating with discipline, as we know this is not the case, but especially people with an eating disorder are oftentimes so caught up in comparison, and they compare themselves to everything and everyone around them. And so if somebody else seems to have a different eating disorder, the eating disorder itself oftentimes make it seem like, oh, their eating disorder is better, or we have to behave better, we have to be more disciplined. And of course, none of this is true. Another example that I can give you was actually also in my own recovery. I would have never ever judged somebody with, for instance, binge eating, just because I understood very early on that binge eating is also, oftentimes actually an answer to restriction or to under eating. But I was still so scared that people thought that I would have binge eating all of a sudden. I thought, okay, now I'm gaining weight, I'm going into overshoot, it's very visible. And before that, I was always afraid that people just think I'm fine now, I'm healthy now. And all of a sudden, I was afraid that people would think I am binging. And first of all, most people honestly don't even think that far. I actually had a session this morning with a client and we were talking about how everything feels so much more intense when you're in that body that is changing, and also with a mind that still is occupied by the eating disorder. Of course, everything feels so much more intense. Other people probably don't even notice, and honestly, most people really don't think that much about it. Some people might notice that your body is changing, but they still don't, not to be rude, but you probably don't matter that much to them that they overthink what is happening. But still, the fear is there. And the fear is there for many, many of my clients, for a lot of people that I worked with in the past. And it's quite interesting, because if you ask them and you're like, hey, how would you feel if you would see another person and they opened up to you and they're like, I struggle with binge eating. And most of those people are like, oh, I would feel compassionate, because I know that they probably, go also through phases of restriction. Maybe they are caught up in a binge restrict cycle. Maybe they don't have other ways to cope with their emotions. I wouldn't judge them, because I'm aware how scary an eating disorder is and how occupying it can be. And that's so tricky because most people with an eating disorder wouldn't even judge anyone else. Just how I didn't judge the person at the table who was saying, oh, you probably think you're better than me, or you probably think you're more disciplined than me. That would have never even come to my mind. But yet, if we're in a position where we're afraid of being judged, all of this just goes away and we don't even remember our own thoughts. And then we're like, yeah, but what if somebody else judges it? So the first question, of course, is, okay, what if? What would be so bad if another person would think you're binging now? Again, normally that is not even the case. Most people don't care that much, but it is about your own identification. So many people identify so much stronger with their eating disorder than they are aware of. You might not want to have an eating disorder anymore, but part of you still might identify with it. Just as a lot of people identify with the sick identity, with a sick looking body, a lot of people also identify with a certain eating disorder. Some people with bulimia identify with bulimia because it's oftentimes, presented a certain way in the media. That's also something to take into account. Like, the ways the media presents eating disorders is certainly not real or realistic. And I think most people who are going through an eating disorder or who had an eating disorder in the past, or even like who witnessed it in loved ones, know that this is true. There are certain shows that I don't even want to name because I really don't want anyone to, be triggered or to be like, oh, I'm gonna watch that show. But there are certain shows that portray different kinds of eating disorders, from anorexia to bulimia to binge eating. And just a little side note, there are so many more. Those might be the most known ones, or the ones that most people have an idea of, but there are so many more eating disorders, and not every eating disorder is to be diagnosed very easily. So that just as a side note. But the way the media portrays eating disorders has a big impact on what people think. Like, binge eating is always portrayed as, somebody who has little self-discipline, is lazy, which is certainly not the case at all. The eating disorder does not say anything about you as a person. The eating disorder does not mean that because you have anorexia, you're disciplined. Because you're binging, you're not disciplined. This is really not true. And I think it is so important to remind yourself of that over and over and over again, to also step away from that identification. Because even though you might know that being anorexic does not equal being disciplined, part of you might still feel that way, or part of you might be afraid that other people feel that way, that other people think you're not going to be disciplined anymore when you choose recovery. And so to look at all these underlying thoughts and thought patterns and beliefs is crucial. I'm pointing that out because it is important to understand that a lot of things that being portrayed in the media are really not realistic, and that also so many people struggle with this. If I would start a poll right now and ask the people who are watching this video and who had an eating disorder in the past, or who currently struggle with an eating disorder, they would probably all be afraid of the judgment from others. Whether it comes to judgment with weight gain, whether it comes to judgment with their eating disorder, whether it comes to, oh, I've been impatient and I had the same fear that I was too big, that other patients would judge me. It is a big thing. And so just to make sure you understand that so many people are going through this, because I feel like it's always helpful to know it is not just you. It can actually be a part of the eating disorder to have those thoughts. And then also be able to step away and again, to rewire, to take a look at this. So for instance, if I'm working with a client, they're like, I'm so afraid that people think that I have another eating disorder now, that I'm binging now. But before that, the same client was like, I'm so afraid that people think I'm healthy now, that I'm healed now. So, okay, you're saying you don't want people to think you have any eating disorder, but you want people to think that you have anorexia, and you're afraid of people thinking you don't have anorexia anymore. But you at the same time are afraid of people thinking you have binge eating. So that's where we take a look at. What do you identify with anorexia? Whether it was in the past, whether it is now, what do you think about yourself? What do you think other people think? And then do a reality check. Because most people don't think that it's great and disciplined to have anorexia. In fact, there's a lot of people who might never had an eating disorder in their life, but they still understand that it is very, very disciplined to go through recovery and to choose recovery every day. So these little reality checks can also be very helpful. But again, this video is just a reminder that you're not alone with those thoughts, but it is completely regardless what eating disorder you struggle with. It is valid and it is worth it. And again, I just mainly focused on binge eating, anorexia, bulimia, and of course, don't get me wrong, a lot of cases, these eating disorders go hand in hand. A lot of people have phases or, just combinations out of these eating disorders. But again, there are so many more eating disorders, whether it is ARFID, EDNOS, OSFED, and a bunch of other ones. None of these EDs are worth more or less. None of these EDs deserve more or less treatment. They are all equally valid. All of these eating disorders can be healed from. I've seen people recovering from all these different eating disorders, but it is so important for me to point out that it doesn't matter what you're struggling with. This says nothing about your value, your discipline, your motivation. And also, if you're going through recovery right now and you're so afraid of being judged or of other people thinking something about you, try to step back and try to look what is under this fear. What are the underlying thoughts and what are the thoughts about yourself? Because oftentimes the fear of judgment or the things we think other people think of us are actually the things we think of ourselves. So I really hope this video helped you guys. I really hope this video was relatable. And if you feel comfortable, let me know in the comments what you think. If you are familiar with those thoughts, maybe you're not. And as always, leave other questions if you want to, and I will see you in the next one.